This week's interview is an epic one. It's our first Oscar-nominated guest and BAFTA winner, that's the British Oscars, Joe Alves. Joe is a legend in the film industry, famous for drawing the concept art and building the shark for Jaws. Then later on, he directed Jaws 3D. I have to let you know about his website, joealvesmovieart.com, where he sells signed storyboard art from his career. And he also has a book called Designing Jaws on Amazon right now. So go buy it. And I'll put the links in the episode notes so you can check it out. Joe has stories that'll make your jaw drop. This guy has worked with Walt Disney, Alfred Hitchcock, Elvis Presley, Steven Seagal. Too many to name here, so you're going to have to listen to the episode. Here is the amazing Joe Alves. What our podcasts, what we focus on mostly is movie sequels. I know you've worked on a couple of those.
All right. Yeah, sequels. Well, I did a couple of those.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start?
Oh, really? Just the way any good movie or good story begins is like the beginning. So where does your story begin? Where'd you grow up?
Oh, well, I grew up in the Bay Area.
Oh, nice.
East Bay Area, Hayward, California, just near Oakland. And I went to high school there, and then I took a year. I went to San Jose State, and then I kept thinking I want to go down to Hollywood and get in the movie business. And so then I came down to Southern California, and I found an art school, which happened to be a great one. It's called Chenard's. It's now Cal Arts, but they specialized in production design and art directing, and that's how I started. And then I had I needed a summer job because I didn't want to come back home. And it was sort of, and while I was in San Jose, I belonged to a fraternity, and I went up and I met a fraternity brother, and I said, yeah, I'm looking for a job. And he says his wife's father works at Disney, and why don't you give him a call? So I found out that Andy Ingman was actually the guy who did all the hiring for the artists at Walt Disney. And he said, come and bring your portfolio. And I thought I was just going to get a job sweeping up or something, for the summer. So I brought my portfolio, and he said, well, you're too late for the training program, for characters, Mickey Mouse and stuff, but there's an opening in special effects, animated special effects. So I said, okay, great. So they put me in this room with this lady, and I said, what do I do? And I'm at this table with a light table that you put your drawings with the 3 pegs on them. And she said, you flip the pages and draw in between. So normally, just briefly at Disney, you start as a trainee, and then then you become a in-betweener, and you probably an in-betweener for a year or two, and then if you move up, you become a breakdown artist, and then after many years, you become an assistant animator, and then on to animator, but that's, years and years, and most of the people have been there for years, But so this is a sort of a strange situation in that I was working for this woman, and she was working for Dwight Carlisle, who was assisting Josh Metter. And Josh Metter was the top effects animator. He did Night in Bald Mountain. He did the fire in Bambi.
Oh, okay.
And he was working on a special project for MGM called Forbidden Planet. And he was drawing the id, animating the id in a Technoscope papers, big white papers, and every frame had to be sort of rendered in pencil because they didn't want to do ink and paint and have that sort of animated line. So anyway, so she was working for this guy, like Carlisle, who's working for the big timer. And anyway, after a few weeks, she had to leave for some reason. And she said, well, you just start working for Dwight. So now I'm working for the assistant to the guy that's, doing this big MGM picture. And after about a month or so, he has to go to the hospital.
Oh, wow.
So now I'm 19 years old, and I'm assisting this top animator, and I'm drawing the id. So I ended up doing the id for for the Forbidden Planet, which had Robbie the Robot and all these sort of crazy things. So, and then I stayed on, and I worked on Sleeping Beauty, and I had the situation where I'm drawing something on Sleeping Beauty, a pick cookie or something. This guy reaches over and corrects. He said, no, this is the way it should be. And I look up, and it's Walt Disney. And he says, like that. That's the way Walt was, you could be very friendly with him. So that was my experience to start in the movie business, and did that for a couple of years, but I wanted to get into live action.
What made you want to get into this? What, growing up when you're in your teens, when did you fall in love and know, like, hey, you know what? I want to do like the art direction, or I want to do drawing. Like what?
Okay, I'll give you a basic, really. I could always draw from the time I could remember. The time when I was fourth or fifth grade, I remember for one class I did all the dwarfs about a foot high, and we pasted them on the wall. So I was always an artist, and I also played the piano when I think I started when I was 10 or something. So I was always interested in that and in theater. But I think basically this is a story I tell occasionally. I'll give it to you quickly. When I was, let's say, a teenager, 14, 15 years old, with a girl that lived up the street a little bit, we'd go down to the movie theaters, Hayward Theater, late Saturday, early Saturday evening, and we saw American in Paris. And I was just taken by that. We were just dancing on our way home, and then I found out they never shot it in Paris. The whole thing was shot in MGM, the back lot, and Stage 30. And then I found out who Cedric Gibbons and Preston Ames were these art directors, and they were responsible for making Paris look like Paris when it was on the back lot. And I thought, gee, that'd be a great thing. I'd love to do that. And then I figured, what do you have to do to be an art director? Well, you have to know how to draft, architectural drafting. And if you could illustrate and draw, do storyboard stuff. So that's what I set out to do, patterned myself after I learned what these art directors did.
And look at that. You see a movie at the age of 14, and then 5 years later, you're drawing and working on Forbidden Planet, and Walt Disney's correcting you. And that's pretty wild. That's a quick transition, 5 years.
Yeah, it was extremely, and I was very young because I got out of high school. I turned 17 the month I graduated. So I was pretty young for my first 2 years in school. After, then I took classes while I was at Disney at USC in special effects because I was interested in that. But I was quite young. And then what happened is I needed to, after I left Disney, I really wanted to get into live action. And so I started working at a little theater, designing sets. I do illustrations to present the set, and then the drafting, and we built it. And I didn't make much money, but I got a good portfolio. And then a friend of the guy that runs the theater knew some people how I could get an introduction to the union. And they evidently what they do is if they're very busy, and they need people, then they let you in. If they're not busy, then you can't get in. But it was a good time, and so I walked around from studio to studio until I finally got a job at a very small studio called Ziv, and they were doing Man in Space and early television kind of stuff. And it would be 1960, I guess, 59, 60. So from there, I became a junior set designer, then a set designer, and I was what they did is you were last to be hired and the first to be fired until you got the seniority, So I worked at Fox on a number of projects. MGM, I worked on Mutiny on the Bounty, working on the Big Boat, the Marlon Brando one.
Oh, wow.
And then I was to Fox and worked on Magnificent Seven and My Fair Lady. But I was in the drafting room. I was never on the set. I was just doing little details and stuff. And then eventually I got a job at Universal, and that became my home. And then I became a senior set designer and worked on It's a Mad, Mad World.
Oh, really?
I worked on that.
Was that the first time when you become a senior set designer? Are you on set?
Well, they shot most of that on location in Palm Springs, but I did go to Stanley Kramer's office and talk to those people. The on-set thing was next. I became assistant art director, and then you're on the set. You start in the morning and you check the set out. You're there 40 minutes before they start shooting, make sure everything's okay, nothing broke. And so I did some television shows, and then I became assistant art director, and I worked on Torn Curtain, Alfred Hitchcock.
I see that. Yeah, I see that on here.
Yeah. So then I had some nice conversations with Hitchcock, and it sort of developed that way. That was quite an experience for me.
And what a great cast on Torn Curtain. Paul Newman.
Oh, yeah. Well, Paul Newman and I became friends because he was interested in racing, and I used to race cars.
You used to race cars?
Yeah, I used to race Formula cars, like Formula 2.
Whoa.
And I did that for eight years. And I won the Pacific Coast Championship in my class. And anyway, Paul wanted to, he said, I understand you're a racer. I said, yeah. He says, well, I've got this Volkswagen, one of the Porsche engine, and, is there any place we could take it and run it? I said, oh, yeah, Willow Springs Raceway up there, toward the Mojave Desert. So we went up there, and he raced around, and then I put him in my Formula car, and he said, if Hitchcock knew I was doing this, he would sue me for $1 million, and he'd probably never work in this business again. And anyway, he went around. He was very fast, and he eventually went off the road and collapsed the front wheel of my car, but it was no big deal. But I said, I think you should race. And he said, I think I'm a little, he used the expression long in the tooth. He thought he was old. He was like 45 then. But he then started racing because then I did another movie with him called Winning, and with Bob Wagner and his wife, Paul's wife. Anyway, he ended up racing until he was like 83, winning a lot of races, and then he died of cancer the year later.
Yeah.
But anyway, probably my big break, Doug, was becoming the art director and getting a series called Night Gallery with Rod Serling. And on Night Gallery, we would have sometimes 2-3 directors each hour, different episodes. And so I got to meet a lot of directors. And Schwark, who I got him hired on Jaws 2, and John Badham, who I ended up doing a number of projects with John, and then this young director called Steven Spielberg. And so Steven and I became friends, and I ended up doing his next 3 movies, Sugarland, Jaws, and Close Encounters. And so from there, so this was all in the studio when I was doing Jaws. It's pretty much you're part of the art department staff, and you getting paid basic wages, nothing outlandish. But after Jaws, and then I did Close Encounters, and then it changed everything because then it became more independent, not so much of the studio system. And I got an agent, and so on Close Encounters, I got 3 times what I was making on Jaws, and then it just sort of escalates, like that.
Yeah.
And then after Close Encounters, which was a very big, I'd say jump in my, I got nominated for Academy Award. I won the Academy Award.
Yeah.
And I lost the Academy Award to Star Wars, which was interesting because they were English art directors, and I was up against them for the British Academy Award, and they were English, but I won that one. So
that is kind of funny.
Well, it's interesting. I think because Lucas came to our set, and he couldn't believe it was the biggest set ever built inside at that time, and he said, "We never built anything like this. We just repainted the same corridors, but the effects were so impressive. I think people were impressed by the visual, of all the effects, and I think, and also it was released in June, and ours was released in November, so we lost some of that sort of that summer release thing, momentum. But basically, after that, then comes the sequel, Jaws 2.
So how quick after Jaws 1 did they go to you and say, hey, we want to do a second one?
First of all, they had let me put it this way. When we were on Jaws, we were over schedule and over budget. And when we came back, we had a few shots we had to do because we did most everything in Martha's Vineyard on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And so we had couple of shots we had to do local, and then we used the MGM tank, Esther Williams tank, to do the underwater stuff. So we came back. We're not heroes. The studio wasn't really hot about doing this shark movie anyway, and Stephen wasn't that interested at first. He wanted to do a pirate movie, and I was on it before Stephen. I was on it. David Brown, who is the Zanuck and Brown team. He's the literary guy, and he called me after Sugarland, and he said that he had this galley sheets of a book that's going to be released, and we're trying to see if they could sell it to make a movie, and if I could go through the book and pick out things to illustrate shark activity. So I did about 25, 30 good-sized illustrations, shark illustrations of the shark and the shark activity. And I was go over and talk to Stephen, and he said, "Yeah, well, I'm not sure what's happening yet. And but if we do this, let's do a full-size shark, the biggest shark, 25 feet in the real ocean, and no special tank and stuff like that." So that was the concept, and then we had a big meeting with all the heads of the production departments and production, art department, camera, and whatever. And I presented my drawings, and basically the effects people said they couldn't do it. They've never made a shark that big, and never made it in the real ocean, and it would take 1.5 years, 2 years. And so as I was leaving, the head of production, Marshall Green, said, "Joe, can you get the shark made?" And I said, well, I certainly could try. So I put together a set designer that was also an engineer, worked at Lockheed before, and I found Bob Matty, who had made the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues. I put a team together of about 7 guys, and we started the process of making the shark. Now, here's the problem is that was October, November of 73. The book came out in February 74, and the studio said, "We got to start shooting this movie in 3 months." I said, "What? I need a year and a half to make the shark." No, we got to take advantage of the popularity of the book. So basically, we started shooting in May, freezing cold, and the shark wasn't finished. The guys were developing it. And so basically, I'd go to Stephen, and I did 200 storyboards of the action of the shark. And
I love those storyboards on your website. I'm going to put that in the link of the episode at Joe Alves Movie Art.
You got to, Doug, the book is coming out,
I know. I'm going to put that on there too. I saw that December 3rd.
Yeah, and not only does it have all the storyboards, but my writer was, and I saved everything. It has a total script breakdown.
Oh, sweet.
Of how, as I was reading it, and I made little sketches. So it's pretty complete. Even there was a note about that meeting with Marshall Green that I'm going to talk about, and the lady at the front desk at the art department said, meeting in Marshall's office per Jaws, and she had it on a little piece of paper. I kept all that stuff. I don't know why, but I did. And
well, thankfully you did.
Well, yeah, I got all the drawings, all the concepts, storyboards. So it's in the book. But so basically, this is a problem. And when I tell people, when people say, oh, the shark didn't work, well, of course it worked. Everything we wanted to get, we got. It just, I would go to Bob Matty and I said, what is working today? And he said, maybe the left to right shark. I'd go to Steven, I said, with left to right, let's see what shots we could do. So Steven said, okay, we'll do this one, that one. And so if it worked, I said, we'll shoot it. If it's not, it's a test, because we didn't have the year to test it,
Yeah.
So, and then people think that, well, because we used the barrel in the shark, that we were doing it because the shark didn't work. No, that was sort of a Hitchcock thing. The barrels represented the shark. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So you see the barrels come up and you say, oh, God, he's down there. Yeah. So that was more mysterious, than showing the shark like they do today so many times,
Yeah, I know. When you don't see it as much, I think Steven did that so well. And we work with him on this. And if you think Jurassic Park, you think that's a dinosaur movie, but the dinosaurs are only on screen, I think, for like 11 minutes. So, no, you're right.
Yeah. And so Steven and I went over, I did like 200 storyboards, so we planned every shot with the shark, when it would be important to use it, when Scheider was, chumming and it comes up, boom, and then breaking through the cabin and stuff like that. So it had the impact. We didn't have to see it all the time,
Oh, yeah.
So that's that takes me up to, let's see, after Close Encounters at Jaws 2. And so your answer, your question was, when did they start thinking about it?
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. As I say, they were not in favor of this movie. We were over schedule, over budget. And they had a screening in Texas, which I didn't go to. And Steven came back. He says, I got 4 screams. I think I could get 5, but I need a couple things. And so the movie had wrapped. The studio didn't. So he asked me if I could build a piece of the hull, which I did in my backyard. And we shot one sequence in my driveway of the shark hitting the boat when it says, show me the way to go home, boom, boom. And we have water spilling into the hull. And we did that in the backyard. And then
that was in your backyard?
Yeah. And then, nobody knew we were doing this. So Steven got the camera somewhere, and then we got the head, the fisherman's head, from the makeup department, and I made another hole with a hole, and in the editor's swimming pool, when Dreyfus goes down and you see the head in the hole of the ship.
Yeah.
That's scary. Yeah. Well, we did that in a swimming pool, the editor's swimming pool. Studio didn't know we were doing this. And then we had the dailies, and they said, we can't have dailies. Jaws has been over with. So anyway, they were a little upset, but then they cut it in, and we had a screening in Lakewood, in LA area here, and it was amazing. I always thought basically that people might laugh at the shark because you used to make all these strange noises, and so after we would be finished with the shark shot, the crew would laugh at it, But take away that sound and put John Williams' music and all that stuff, they weren't laughing.
No, my parents were scared to go into the water after they saw it.
Well, they went crazy. The audience went crazy, and so sitting behind me was Lou Rosselman, president of Universal, and Sid Sheinberg, and all these executives, and they went into the men's room, and they said, we're going to re-release this thing. We're going to release this thing, big, wide summer release. That was the first time ever anybody did that.
Really?
It was like 450. Yeah, because they used to just release them slowly, but that was the big. The end was 450 theaters. Now it's 4,000.
Yeah.
So that changed the whole summer release process, and it made its money back in a couple of days. Even with $3.50 tickets.
Yeah.
So basically, that went on. Then we did Close Encounters, and so then Zanuck and Brown still owned the rights to that, and they approached me about designing it. And I had an agent at this time, and the deal was he said, no, Joe will design it, but he wants to be associate producer, and he also wants to direct the second unit. So they agreed to that, and they asked me if I could go to Steven and talk to Steven about doing it, and Steven said something about he would do it for a certain price, but he was going to do this picture called 1941.
Yeah.
And he asked me if I could do 1941, and said Jaws 2. And I said, yeah, I'll go with you. But he didn't have a deal. He said, no, I don't have a deal yet, So when you don't have a deal, you don't, and you got another offer that's going to, give you something you never had, producing, designing, directing. So I went with them, and it was a different situation because now I'm part of the whole part of the movie, the casting and story and all that, and the art direction, and directing the second unit, which is the action stuff, that detailing that the director, would go on and work with the principals, and then you'd come follow through and maybe do some cuts of the shark doing stuff, things like that.
Did you always want to direct?
That's interesting. When I did direct on Jaws, what happened was we were ready to wrap, and there was a sequence where the shark, the little boy, Kitten Boy, is on a little raft.
Yeah.
And the shark comes up and eats him. And so Stephen was anxious to get back home and start cutting and working on the sound and everything, the music. So he said, could you direct that sequence? Well, I've been doing all the storyboards, so I know shot for shot what to do. So I directed that sequence, and it was complicated because I had a shark, I had kids in the foreground, and I had a dummy on the raft. So when they asked me to do Jaws 2, I thought, well, yeah, I'd like directing second unit. So, yeah, that got me interested in doing it.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
That's awesome. And what was it like? Obviously, the first one, you had everyone there. You had Richard Dreyfuss, you have Robert Shaw, you had Roy Schneider, and then just in the second one, you have Roy Schneider. Are any of those stories true about like the shoot with him, that he didn't really want to do the movie and he was just doing it because he was under contract?
He didn't want to do the sequel. This is true.
Yeah.
And what happened was I had just finished Close Encounters, and they had hired a director, John Hancock, and he was starting to he started to get involved with stuff he shouldn't have, like how the shark works, and telling Bob Matty, to do this and that, so what happened basically is the first shark we made off the studio lot, because I was going to do it independent. The effects department of the studio didn't, said it would take too long, blah, blah. So I did it away. And the whole process, the sharks cost us $250,000. When I started on Jaws, they've been working on the new shark at the studio, and they already spent $2 million. because you're at the studio and they put charges on this movie that was very successful, so they figured, they could keep charging money. So John Hancock got involved with that. We went to the location back, and I got involved with him in looking at the location, Martha's Vineyard. He's a very nice guy, but he had some problems the first week of directing, and so I said, well, let me go shoot some walk and talk things around the vineyard, just to establish a second unit. And he had some problems, and so I said, okay, well, I'm going to go down to Florida. That's where we're going to shoot all the water stuff, because the water, there was not as much boat traffic. And I discovered that on Close Encounters, that if we did Jaws 2, I'd like to do the water stuff in Florida near Pensacola. So,
okay.
well, because problem I had with Martha's Vineyard is when I scouted it, the bay that we were going to use was beautiful, and it was empty, but there was snow on the beach. In the summer, suddenly there's thousands of boats, hundreds of boats anyway. They're coming from Hyannisport, so that was a big problem for us, with the boat traffic and the people. So I said, if we do a 2, I'd like to do it in Florida, and there was nobody out there, so that worked out. Anyway, I found out they fired John, and they were going to cancel the movie. And then the studio said, well, how about Joe and Verna Fields, who won the Academy Award for editing Jaws, well, you co-directed, but the Directors Guild wouldn't let you do that. If you start in one position, like a cameraman, and they fire the director, you can't become the director. So then I came up with Joe Schwark, who did a number of night galleries, and I always thought he had good ideas, and so anyway, they hired him. So then we started the movie again. We did everything in Navarre Beach, Florida, and so in fact now we're behind schedule. So he would work with the principals. He had a very, very difficult time with Roy. Roy was just didn't want to do the movie, but anyway, they dealt with it. We had all those kids on the boat, and I did a lot of shots with the shark, and it was shark attacking the helicopter, and shark, breaking the transom of the boats and things like that. So it ended up being a long process, probably, I think, 85 days of second unit, and but we struggled through it, and then the picture came out, and it was very successful. At that time, the biggest grossing, sequel, I think, at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure. And the movie, that, like I told you, our podcast, like I love talking about movie sequels because they're a unique, like, monster to try to tackle, because there's so many directions you can go in. And I think with this one, it was great because the stakes were kind of, risen. The kids were older. Martin's kids, They were in trouble, and you had the helicopter and the shark taking that out. And
that was an interesting thing. When I read that, the helicopter, I thought, that sounds pretty silly. And then I researched it, and I found a Bell helicopter with the pontoons on it. And I looked at it, and I said, gee, if that thing lands on the water, those pontoons are going to look like a seal.
Yeah.
From the shark's point of view. And, with all a shark would probably go after those pontoons. It's gone after surfboards and things like that, because that shape looks like, a big seal. So I directed that sequence, and it was tricky as hell. And we had to make a special helicopter with blades that would break and stuff. So that was difficult. And then that went on and on, shooting boats, trying to get all of these boats together. Some were, different kind of catamarans and sloops and stuff, and they don't sail at the same speed. So it was a long shoot to say the least.
Yeah.
And Janot really had his problems with Roy, but we got it done, and it worked. And then that was it. I was sort of finished with sharks and shark movies.
How did you think it turned out? Like the first time you saw it, like the full movie?
I after struggling with it, I worked on it for, God, I can't tell you how long, year and a half. And I was shooting stuff in the winter when everybody went home. I had Roy's boat crash, and I did that. So, I was pleased with it. Let me say that, and the audience seemed to be pretty pleased with it. There was a lot of activity, and the kids worked. They were quite good. So, yeah, I think it worked out pretty good. There were some shots I would have done differently, but they cut it a little bit different. And then it was cut and recut because I had so much of my stuff. The director cut a lot of it out, but then the editor, Verna Fields, who's now vice president at Universal, she put it back in, and so it was a good balance. So I was pretty pleased with that. But then, let's see. Then I went off on after that. I think
Escape from New York.
Well, yeah, but what happened was I really wanted to do this race movie because of my 8 years racing cars. So I had this thing called Out in Front, and I had Jim Brolin. I interviewed Jim Brolin. I had an older driver, younger driver. Dennis Quaid is younger, and I've been talking to John. And so I went off and I scouted all over Europe racetracks, and I was going to direct it. And I came back, and the studio that was going to do it got bought by somebody else, and so they canceled everything. So then my agent said, I think you better go back to work. So he says, I want to introduce you to these young filmmakers, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. And so then I met them, and we did Escape from New York, and it was a lot of fun. It was a really fun group of people, and I think it came out pretty good. It was quite different in this respect, Doug, is that they had been making small movies like Halloween and they were like $300,000 movies. Is what their big budget was, and so I'm coming off of Close Encounters and stuff like that, and Jaws too. So it took a while to get the thinking together. But this budget, they had like $6 million, so we had a little bit more to play with than they normally did. And John was fun to work with, really laid back guy, and Deborah Hill, we became good friends. So that was good experience. And then what happened is I had a movie after that. Zanuck Brown wanted me to do a picture called The Ninja. Irv Kirshner was directing. It was all set in New York, so I moved to New York, and I was there for 7 months doing The Ninja. Was a #1 bestseller, but Kirshner kept rewriting it, and we scouted Japan and did all this. I actually started building sets, and then it was a Fox movie, and Fox got bought out by some guy, and they canceled all the movies. So
did you keep anything from that?
No. I have illustrations. Yeah,
that's what I mean. Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. No, I got a lot of illustrations because what we were doing is we needed to do Japan, and I said I could do Japan in part of the Bronx. There was an area they were tearing down. So, but basically, I came back, and I'd go see Verna Fields, who was now vice president. Hang out at her office, and she said, Joe, they were doing this thing, Jaws 3, People Zero, and basically they were going to make fun, like Animal House, they were going to make fun of the people that made Jaws. And I said, God, that seems bad taste. Their biggest grossing movie, they're going to make fun of the people that made it. So that went on for some time, Verna said. That was, and from what I heard, this is just hearsay, Stephen went to Scheinberg, was the head of their president, and said, if you make this, then I won't do anything with Universal.
I read that too.
Okay. So that was hearsay. And, but yeah. So they got rid of it. And Alan Landsberg, who was a television producer, that's incredible and that kind of stuff. She said, why don't you talk to him? They're going to do this Jaws 3, thing over there. So I went to talk to him, and basically he said, well, I'll let you produce it. I said, no, either I direct it or I'm not interested, He said, well, why don't you go scout some locations with the writer, and we'll talk about it later. So I went to Florida and with the writer, and we looked at a number of theme parks, and one of them had an underwater film of going through the tide pools, and it was just beautiful, and it was in 3D. And so I came out, and they said, what's the matter? What are you thinking? Making a movie in 3D? I said, no, Jaws 3D. It sort of takes the onus off the third by making it a 3D, and yet it's still Jaws 3D. So there's sort of a play on the word, And so when I got back, and I actually what happened was, I still have this sketch too. It was Thanksgiving at my sister's house, Lake Tahoe. I did a sketch of a shark coming at you, and it was 3D. And I showed it to Landsberg when I got home, and he says, oh, this is great. Let's show it to Universal. So we showed it to Sid, and he said, can I have this? I said, of course. But he just wanted to take it to Lou Wasserman. They came back. Okay, we're going to do Jaws 3D, and you can direct. So that's the whole thing. That's how it happened.
Was it a lot more difficult shooting in 3D because the way everything?
Oh, God. Oh, so first of all, we didn't have new cameras. And I got Jimmy Conner, was a really good cameraman. We had to shoot with old cameras. I said to John Landsberg, I said, no, we got Aeroflex making this some new 3D small cameras. We should wait. No, we're going to start shooting. So we started shooting what we called the Ultra Jam, because it was the Ultra Cam, but it was jammed all the time. So we shot a week with that, and then we got our new cameras, and so we had to just throw that week away because it didn't work with the other new camera system. It was difficult with 3D because not only the convergence, what you're working with when you're shooting, it's when you're projecting it. Every projectionist have to adjust the images together because you've got two images that have to slide together. So we had some problems theatrically through the theater's system. That some of them didn't take the time to adjust it, so eyes would hurt. But it was the other big thing I had a problem is that we took a normal 35 millimeter film and I cut it in half. So the top section was left eye, bottom section was right eye. Now I had a format that was extremely wide, like Cinemarama, CinemaScope, big white. So then you have to balance all that negative space, But
when you were in charge of this movie, how quick were you like, I want to work with Dennis Quaid, because you already had him in that other picture because the studio bought out? Was that your decision to bring him up?
Actually not. Alan Landsberg had done something with Quaid, and and I had seen Quaid, and I had thought about him on that bicycle movie, so that was good. We bought a producer from New York, Rupert Hitchcock. He liked Bess Armstrong, and then there was this young girl that came in, interviewed, and I liked her a lot, Leah Thompson, and they said, they weren't too crazy about it. Then we went to New York to cast, and she shows up again. I thought you guys want to see me. She's incredible. Aggressive. Yeah. And I said, I really like her, and they said, okay, if you like her, you got it. And so that was her first part ever, and so that worked good with John Putch. A good relationship, the two of them, and so I had no problems. Then Lou Gossett was a big thing.
Oh yeah,
because that came up, and the big thing was that here's a black man playing the head of SeaWorld, and SeaWorld didn't hire a lot of African American people.
There was like a big thing about that back then?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I got nominated for an NAACP award, but because I had used him in a black man in a major role, but I think George Lucas won for some other movies the same year. But anyway, but it was great, and Lewis was good. He knew his lines all the time, and it was Dennis was a little. It would take him a little while to get into the scene. We have to do a couple takes before he would get into it. Bess Armstrong was very consistent. So that wasn't my problem. And Landsberg was my problem, basically. He wanted to run the show, and the first day of shooting, he's there trying to give me shots. And I said, well, no, I'm the director. Just, well, yeah, but do this, do that. Finally, I had a first assistant, Scott Maiden, who was like 6'5", big guy. I said, just keep Alan away where I get my shots done. It worked out, but the big problem in the end is the problem I have when I see the movie is I cut the movie to 2 hours and 3 minutes, exactly like Jaws 2 and Jaws. Alan and the studio felt if they could cut it down by 25 minutes, they could get 5 screenings a day at the theaters instead of 4. So they just arbitrarily, I didn't have final cut. They ended up cutting about 25 minutes out of the movie of my personal relationship things. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So that was a little disturbing. So there were some great scenes that I had that they just cut out because they wanted to expedite the film, and you can't do anything about it unless you're, big time director where you have final cut. So they wanted to, I guess because it's 3D and it was a big deal, and they wanted to rush it out and get as many screenings as they could, because then they had another 3D movie that they wanted to show after Jaws. So they cut Jaws 3 made a lot of money in the first couple of weeks. Yeah. And then they pulled it much too soon because they wanted something else in 3D out there. So in the end, it was sort of a negative thing for me, because though the movie was extremely successful, and I still have a fan base all over the world. I got one in France that keeps sending me information. Big collectors of Jaws 3.
Oh, that's awesome.
But the critics tend to really beat up on sequels. They did then, and at that time, I think there might have been a Rocky 3, but we were one of the first, second sequels, and the critics weren't too good. But the critics didn't particularly like Close 2, and they really didn't get great reviews on Jaws. When you go back and look at it, the critics said, "Oh, it's a shark movie." It was a shark movie that still lives today.
Oh yeah, 45 years later. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Doug, in the mail today, I got two things about would you sign this shark or would you send it to? And yesterday I had one. Another thing about they send me pictures of the shark or something, and that's 45 years ago. I'm still getting this kind of response, I know. I'm
going to be ordering. I want to get one of your signed storyboards. I'm going to pick one out.
Oh, okay.
They're pretty
all
cool.
Right. Good. Yeah, awesome. I did a bunch. So anyway, when you see the book, they're all in there.
Oh, that's cool. So yeah, like you mentioned before, that's why I love movie sequels, because I think people do the wrong thing, even when TV shows that have follow-ups, because they look at the first movie and then they compare the second to the first or the third to the first, and that's just not fair because they're different movies. No,
it's a totally different movie. I mean, here's the thing. last year in Catalina Island, they had a Jaws exhibit in their museum, and it ran for 6 months. And I had all my drawings, my originals, and other ones. And Greg Nicotero, who does The Walking Dead, he has a big prosthetic company that builds creatures and stuff. And he made the three characters so incredibly real, with hair on their arms and stuff. And they're standing on the stern of the boat. And so you walk into the thing, you see my drawings, you see a shark head that he had made, and so you walk around and you see all that, and then there's the cage, the original cage. So that thing ran for six months, and we sold an early copy of the book that's coming out there at the island. And so anyway, what happened was it was an evening screening outside in a big theater, but not big screen, and they were going to show it, and I was going to say, well, okay, I've seen it before, but then the lady head of the museum said, and then Joe's going to talk about it afterwards. So my wife had saved me a seat, so we sat there and we watched it. And I hadn't seen it for years, Doug, and so now I'm watching it without thinking about, is the shark working? Does this look good? And I was just absorbed into the movie, and the third act with the characters were so good. I mean, the relationship between Dreyfus and Shaw, and they're just at each other, the pompous, kid, and the old grumpy salesman, and then this cop that doesn't want to be there at all, I mean, what the hell am I doing on a boat? And I realized it's a hell of a good movie.
Oh, it's a phenomenal movie.
So it's not just a shark, I mean, yeah, there's three guys who have a problem, and there's a thing out there that wants to get them, And so that's basically it. And then the other ones, we had to do a total different thing. We got all the kids. We brought back, the kids, younger on the boats, and so that there was that tie-in, and then we had, Scheider. But then the third one was years later. The guys are growing up, so it's still the two boys, and it's a different thing. We're in a theme park, and so you're right. There are different movies, It doesn't, if it led into the next day, after Jaws, if after Dreyfus and Scheider swam to the shore, and then you pick them up getting the shore, and then Dreyfus goes off and does something, and Scheider has another problem, that, then you could, see but anyway, it's different.
No, definitely. So the next year, one movie that you worked on was Starman. And I know you were talking about Nicotero before, but you worked with Rick Baker.
Yeah. The thing, what happened on Starman is basically after I did Jaws 3, I started developing projects, and I went through a lot of scripts and studios, and it's no different than it is today. It's really difficult to get a movie made.
Yeah.
Unless you're big timer. And even sometimes, I'm sure Steven doesn't have any problems. There are a few people like that, but a lot of, well-known people don't get another movie again. If you look at it, some directors, it's been years. So I had projects out there, and nothing happened. And then I scouted a couple and didn't know, then they canceled it. And so then finally, Carpenter called me and asked me if I would do Starman, and I said, well, I'm really interested in directing, but what I'll do is I'll do a visual consultant and direct a second unit for you. So he said, great. And so they brought an art director in that worked for me on Close Encounters, Denny Lamino. So he was a production designer. But I laid out a lot of stuff visually. There was a rocket ship and all that stuff. So I did preliminary drawings. And then I went off and did the car when what's his name, the star. We were a second unit of the car going from where he comes down and he comes through Monument Valley and all this.
Yeah, Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, Jeff Bridges. So it wasn't Jeff, but it was supposed to be Jeff driving all the way to where this the big volcano or crater, and then I designed a spaceship that comes down, and I worked with ILM on that, and they didn't do it quite the way I wanted it. It was sort of a compromise. So that basically was happening on Starman, and then there are other projects John had. He was going to do, a couple other things which I broke down and did, breakdowns and stuff, but it didn't. Creature from the Black Lagoon, he was going to redo that.
Oh, really? That'd be cool.
Yeah, but then that didn't happen, but I did a breakdown. And so, yeah, and then Stephen wanted me to do something, but the connection was, it didn't happen. E.T., I was doing something else, but he had called me. And then, your career goes on. Directing jobs were hard to get, and I think that I kept trying until I did a thing with Taylor Hackford, and
you've worked with some heavy hitters. When you look back at your career, like I've interviewed a lot of directors and people that have worked in film, but every movie you've done, like production design towards in like '97, you worked with Steven Seagal, you worked with Wesley Snipes, you worked with Emilio Estevez and Mick Jagger and Free Jack.
Oh, yeah. I got to tell you, this is interesting just for a career thing. I worked Elvis Presley's last movie for Change of Habit.
Oh, cool.
So I was assistant art director, and Mary Tyler Moore would get really upset because he would show up late and he wouldn't know his lines, and he had this big entourage around him, so you couldn't even talk to him. Then he'd come there and he didn't know the lines, and she'd get upset. Anyway, so that was Elvis. Years later, I'm working with Mick Jagger, and I figured, he's a big star. He's not going to be accessible. And he was the nicest guy. And he had this, we're at the Academy Awards screening and television thing. He said, "Joe, come to the house, bring your wife." So we spent the evening with him and his wife, watching the Academy Awards and a couple other people, but just, really relaxed, low-key guy, wasn't stoned or anything. Not at all what he presents on the stage. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I interviewed one of his bodyguards for when he used to tour in Australia, this guy that was a martial artist. And he told me cool stories about him. And he said, like, you think this guy was like this big party animal. He would party, but at the same time, he'd wake me up at 4:00 in the morning and show him how to karate chop.
Yeah, and he was into the business aspect of it, too. So he's a very, very smart guy. We had a good relationship, and he was a lot of fun. Steven Seagal, not so much. Very nice to me. I built a lot of sets. Huge sets. We had a thing where he has to go into this casino. And I said, okay, we'll shoot it in the casino. Oh, no. He won't go in a casino because there's smoke in the atmosphere, bad for him. So I said I flew back, we were back east in Kentucky, flew back, talked to the executives of Warner Brothers. I said, it's going to cost $1 million if I build a set for, a casino. It's a big set. And, so we built the casino, but he would show up, like I built this cabin, up in, the hills up in Kentucky, and, it was just beautifully green, but when Kentucky changes seasons, it becomes red and orange and so it was all green, and, the cabin and a beautiful view, and we have an 7 for 8 shoot. He should be there and makeup by 7 and shoot by 8. He'd show up at 10:30, 11 o'clock.
Jesus.
And So that was a problem, and I told the executives, I said, look, if Steven, we delay this much more, the whole background's going to change color. It's not going to be green; it's going to be red and orange. So anyway, we did wrap. Then we went to L.A., and I had to make L.A. look like Kentucky because he wants to come back home. So he pretty much is self-focused. Unlike, some big stars I worked with. I worked with Rock Hudson and on a thing called Embryo. Big star in the 50s. Just the nicest guy you could believe. Just the nicest guy. Had a big, party when we wrapped and went to his house. And Paul Newman was a great guy. And then you get, the Seagals and people like that.
I know. From what I've heard, because I've interviewed a bunch of people that have worked with him. That's why I wanted to ask you anyway. And it's all been the same thing. I've interviewed people that have worked with him. Like I interviewed William Sadler, and he worked with him in Hard to Kill. And that's going to think, if you look at the Steven Seagal, like his filmography, that's like in the beginning. And then I interviewed a couple of his directors for his direct-to-DVD movies that he does now. Same thing from the beginning. And from what I heard was with him, his first movie, he like went to the lot. I don't know what studio it was, but he did like a demonstration, like a karate demonstration. And whoever was in charge then loved him and gave him like a big movie. And his first movie did so well. So he didn't have to like work his way up like a lot of the people that you work with. So he's always been that high. So I guess it just gave him an ego.
Yeah. And then just some people are just self-focused. They think about themselves and not... and you get people like Meryl Streep, who just couldn't be nicer, who's brilliant, and other people, that are really, they're in the business. They know that they're supposed to be there on time, and they know they're supposed to know their lines. And if they have a problem with the dialogue, they discuss that with the director and work that out. But, by and large, most of the people have been pretty good, but Seagal was a little difficult. And that was, I got to tell you, the Seagal movie, Fire Down Below, I think is some of my best art directions. I mean, I had the casino, I built this church that we burned down. I built a little lake that reflected. I did this cabin, and we did a lot of good work. And he was very thankful. He did say afterward, Joe, it was a beautiful job you did, and blah blah blah. So he was okay with me, but the fact that he would just show up so late, it was really hard on the schedule and the director. But
yeah. And you got to think, all these movies you've done, I'm looking at, like, I've never seen the movie Shadow Conspiracy, but everyone in that movie is like a heavy hitter actor-wise, like Donald Sutherland, Charlie Sheen, Linda Hamilton, Stephen Lang. It's unbelievable. The director, I had a problem with that director, George Cosmatos. He was just a difficult man. He just had an attitude, he would come in and look at my set and say, how do I shoot this? I don't know this. What am I doing? And I said, well, George, you bring the guy in here. Don't tell me how to direct. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is terrible. Anyway, then at the end of the day, he would call me over. He said, oh, Joe, this is fantastic. I love what you do. I said, why don't you shout that out now? He'd always start the day with shouting and bad and everything's not good. Ugh. And then at the end of the day, it would be, oh, yeah, you did a great job. And so I never worked with him again. But that was, anyway. So just a couple more questions before I let you go.
Yeah.
Obviously, you loved doing art and you were such a great drawer at such a young age. Do you think if you didn't, get to where you were, if that person wasn't sick that day and everything didn't happen, what do you think you'd be doing right now? Do you think you still would have went into the film industry, or was there something else?
There really wasn't anything. I was what I did, I majored in architecture and minored in drama. So in college, I did do a little part in a play, but I wasn't a very good actor. But I did direct the senior extravaganza in high school, so I put a thing together. So I was into theater. So And in architecture, so I might have got a job drafting somewhere if it wasn't, but I did get a job drafting sets. That's how I started. So if it would have been something like that, maybe for some architectural firm or nature, but it would have to do with art or architecture, you know.
No, that's so cool. That's cool that you directed then, and then you got to do it, you know, down the road. And
well, when I do lectures, you know, sometimes with young people, and what I say to them when they're young, I said, look, decide what you want to do, find out how to do it, and then realize if you're not going to do it, somebody's going to do it, you know. So at least pursue it, you know. I mean, I have one daughter who's graduated in the in Boston Art Institute, magna cum laude. She's never won in her class, and she does animation for some you know, online cartoon stuff. And
oh, really?
Another
That's
one,
cool.
Yeah. And so she keeps working. The other one wants to be an actress, and she's done a couple of small movies, but that's really, really difficult. But she does, you know, stuff, dramatic stuff. So they're interested. And so, yeah, you have to try to decide where you want to go and how do you get there and what do you have to know to get there. And that's when going back to the American in Paris, when I thought, that's not Paris. It's people making it look like Paris. That sounds like a pretty good thing, you know. It's like doing a Viking ship, you know, creating different things. And, you know, you start with nothing and you're going to do a Western town. Okay, what do I do? What does it look like? Well, it looks like this and that. And, you know, you start researching. We used to have research departments, and you go and say, I'm going to do this. Give me all the books you can on Western, you know, buildings, that period. Now you could pretty much Google all that stuff. You know, it's quite different. The whole system has changed. People, art directors, production designers don't draw as much as they. Some of them don't know how to draw.
Yeah.
They get online and they find stuff and they say, "Oh, build something that looks like this," or maybe something like that. Where before we would start with a blank piece of paper and say, "Okay, let's see. I'm going to do a sheriff's office. Now let's see, what would it have? You know, blah blah blah, like that." And because I did a series with Heck Ramsey, Richard Boone, and I did a sheriff's office, but it was in 1903, so it was a change from a sheriff's office to a precinct. You know, so it was a combination of both.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying? So the sheriff wore a derby hats and black suits, and Boone was still an old sheriff with big cowboy hats and boots. So anyway, you research this stuff and say, oh, okay, this is a Western town, but wait a minute, it's 1903. So occasionally there's a car that goes by, or, you know, so you have to research it, detail it out, and then you draw it and start building it. You know?
And I think it's so cool that you did so many different types of movies too. You got like Close Encounters, Jaws, and then you do something futuristic like Free Jack and from New York. So it's really cool that you're able to work on so many different things. And like you said, you saw that movie.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, it was good. It was good.
I was going to say, I saw an interview with you and somebody asked you if you're going to write a book. And I really hope you do, because you've worked on amazing pictures, you've done amazing work, and you worked with some amazing people. And I'm sure you have stories about each and every one.
Well, actually, Dennis Prince, who wrote the Jaws book that's coming out, wrote my whole biography.
Oh, awesome.
What happened was we met each other on a show, because he had written Aurora model making book, and we were flying back. We flew back together, and he was saying about doing a Jaws book and stuff. I said, "Well, there've been Jaws book," and then he left his job So he had a year. So I have all these tapes just over the years of different things that I did. So he wrote the biography, starting with the Disney thing all the way up. And so, but then the Catalina thing came, so then he wrote the Jaws book, and then we also wrote a book on Close Encounters. But we ran out of, we had to publish that ourselves because Sony wanted to get involved, and they didn't want us to do this and that. But anyway, so there is a book that we're trying to find a publisher for.
Sweet.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because we'll see how well the Jaws book does.
I'm sure it's going to do great. That movie stands the test of time.
Well, the thing, Doug, about my biography is that I really didn't want it about me so much as about the period, the studio system, how the 6 or 7 major studios, how you got knocked around until you found a home, and then you were a staff guy. Then they used to give you the work, and then the studio system broke up, and then you had to get an agent, and you had to go. It was just different. So it's like really showing the transition of time of working with Hitchcock and how that differs, with somebody
Walt
else.
Disney,
So
like that's so
Walt
cool.
Disney.
All the people that you have all these interactions with. Joe is so great. I could have talked to him for hours about his career. Don't forget to buy his book, Designing Jaws, and check out his signed artwork at joealvesmovieart.com. Again, all the links are in the notes. Well, there you have it. Now your job is to go watch Jaws 2 because that's the next film that me and Jamie are talking about. I just watched Jaws, and man, that is such a perfect movie. So we'll see what the second one has in store. Subscribe so you don't miss out. And don't forget to review, rate, and share our podcast. Follow us on social media at Sequels Only. Good night.
Good night, guys.